Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 2025 MRC Howard Lecture. I'm Brian Loughnane. I'm the Chairman of the Menzies Research Centre, and it's the Centre's great honour and pleasure to welcome you here today. I'd like to acknowledge the very many distinguished guests here. I saw the list, and if I started reading that, we'd still be going at 7 o'clock, and Susan won't get a chance to speak. I particularly acknowledge and thank the staff of the MRC led by David Hughes and the team that's helped put this on together today. The MRC is an independent think tank associated with the Liberal Party. The Centre supports freedom, human dignity, personal responsibility and private enterprise as essential to the development of a strong and prosperous Australia. If you don't already receive the free weekly email produced by David and his team at the MRC, I invite you to go online and to sign up. The MRC is a not-for-profit and we rely on financial support to continue our policy and advocacy work. There's some information on your chairs on how you can support the MRC and become a member. So please consider joining for just $15 a month, and with that comes the opportunity to support the advancement of our shared values and exclusive access to our content and events. The Howard Lecture is the major annual public event of the MRC. It's named, of course, in recognition of our great former Prime Minister, John Howard. And Mr. Howard, it's a particular pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. Mr. and Mrs. Howard, Mr. and Mrs. Howard have been wonderful supporters of the MRC and of the lecture, and we thank them for that. We particularly welcome John's grandson, Hughes, Angus, so thank you for coming along. Mr. Howard will join Susan on the stage in a panel discussion moderated by our Director David Hughes at the conclusion of Susan's speech. Ladies and gentlemen, over the years, the Howard Lecture has been delivered by our party leaders, important coalition figures such as John Anderson, and by international statesmen such as John Key and Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister of Canada. Today, Sussan Ley joins that distinguished list, and we're very grateful to Susan for agreeing to do so. Opposition leader, as John Howard well knows, is not an easy job. The more so when you take on that responsibility after the party has suffered a major defeat. So, Susan, thank you so much for what you are doing. Today's speech is the latest in a series of major addresses that Susan has made since becoming leader. If you've not already read the speech that Susan made to CEDA in September on the economy, I commend it to you. In that speech, Susan reiterated the party's commitment to smaller government, lower taxes, budget responsibility and improved productivity by, among other things, addressing the reactive industrial relations changes made by Labor. We have a weak government which is meandering through office with an unambitious agenda for the future of our country. Consequently, our standard of living is suffering and families and small businesses are suffering. Susan is therefore to be commended for renewing the party's commitment to economic reform, something that Australia desperately needs. Thank you, Susan, for agreeing to honour the MRC, and I now have great pleasure in asking you to deliver the 2025 Howard Lecture.
Thank you very much indeed, Brian. And firstly, may I acknowledge former Prime Minister John Howard, the Menzies Research Centre Chair, of course, Brian Loughnane, and other members of the MRC Board. Director David Hughes, thank you for all the work that you do. To my parliamentary colleagues, thank you very much for joining me here. I want to give a shout out to Deputy Ted O'Brien, whose deep knowledge of energy policy has helped us land the position that we're in today. But every single one of my colleagues has had the last couple of days it feels a little bit locked in Canberra to talk about something that is important to us, is important to the economy, but most importantly is vital to our national interests. So I thank my colleagues for being here, and I thank all of you especially for attending. It's almost, well, it probably is exactly 24 years ago that the seat of Farrer had not been decided. It was the election of 2001, and it took 10 days for the seat of Farrer to be counted. I was the last person to walk into Prime Minister John Howard's party room, and during that time I was biting my nails and wondering what came next and thinking it was all over. And I was outside feeding the potty calves in my gumboots in the pouring rain on the farm, and my middle daughter, Georgina, rushed out, aged 10, and said, "John Howard's on the phone." And I ran in and broke the rule where you don't run inside with your gumboots on, and raced up to the phone and picked it up and said, "Mr. Howard, oh, Prime Minister, and John Howard said to me, "I don't know if you'll get there, but I just want you to know that every single one of us in Canberra is gunning for you." And it was just a wonderful feeling, because it was the first point in time that I felt part of this team. I'd obviously been part of the Liberal Party branch I was a member of for a long time, but I just felt really, my heart warmed at that moment. And some of you may also know that the reason why the seat of Farrer took so long to be decided was because I was contesting it against the National Party. And I didn't need a single National Party preference to win the seat. That's not how the lay of the land went. But since then, I've had cause many times to think about those early years and the lessons, the great privilege of learning from our greatest Prime Minister, and the lessons of leadership that it gave me, how to be a leader in government, how to be a leader of a team. And some of you have heard this story before, and Mr. Howard has heard it many times, but it's worth repeating because it's very significant. I was and am a rural member of Parliament. Sometimes the rural Liberals feel a little bit forgotten, because rural Australia, let's face it, can feel a little bit forgotten. And we in the millennium drought were struggling in quite an extraordinary way, and I felt that pain from the constituents that I represented, because I knew it from my own life. I knew what it was like to struggle with the highs and many lows of life on the land. I knew what it was like not to be able to pay the bills, to have your sheep needing to be shot because the price was too low. And I felt that pain for my constituents, and I invited the Prime Minister to come down, and Prime Minister John Howard came to the town of Finley in the Riverina, and no Prime Minister before or since has ever visited Finley. In the Finley Memorial Hall, the farmers gathered, and as farmers do, they didn't there was no sensitivities. They just marched straight up and said, "This is what's going on and we want you to know about it." And they were so pleased that the Prime Minister of this country was there to listen to them. And the big thing then was something, I think we trace this back to Menzies, how important small business is to us, what it means to us, how we always feel that small businesses are forgotten by the other side. So I said, we're going to visit an accountant in town, and she does all the books, so she knows exactly what's going on. We went in there and she had this sponge cake. It was the most amazing sponge cake. I've been a shearer's cook, but I could never cook sponge cakes. And we sat down and had a slice of sponge cake, and she was one of the most, she's no longer with us, one of the most articulate people I've ever met. She just described what it was like for the small businesses. And as we walked out of there, the Prime Minister said to me, we need to do something about this. When we get back to Canberra, you can be involved, and we'll develop a package that gives exceptional circumstances, drought relief to small businesses, and we did. And for me, it was just a lesson about how you listen, how you learn, how you implement what you need to do to look after the people that you go to Canberra to represent. There were many, I could deliver many other anecdotes. I always knew, though, that with the backbench that we had in 2001, well, it was quite a large backbench, people got antsy and they didn't always agree with everything, and sometimes they felt disconnected from the ministers or the decision-making. If there was an issue, everyone would get in a room, John Howard, Prime Minister, would walk in, say nothing, he'd have a couple of people with him, and listen to all the grumbling backbenchers who grumbled a lot, which was perfectly fine, by the way. I don't mind it either. And at the end of it, he wouldn't just say, well, thanks everybody, great meeting. He would stand up and say, right, this is what we're doing. And he would spell it out. And the scribes or the staff that were with him would be furiously writing it down and no doubt thinking, oh, how are we going to deliver this? But we did, and they did, and that mattered, and that made a difference, and I've never forgotten it. Now, if you walk into the John Howard Prime Ministerial Library at Canberra's Museum of Australian Democracy, you encounter the following words emblazoned on the wall. Politics is not a public relations exercise. It is fundamentally a contest of ideas about what best serves the national interest. It is the ability to evaluate competing visions of the common good that marks out a truly great people. And those words ring in my ears as I speak to you today. And while you read a lot of what journalists think goes on behind closed doors within the Liberal Party, can I tell you, and all my colleagues here will attest to this, that as we discussed energy policy in the last 2 days, the national interest came up in almost every single contribution. And consistent with this mantra is that my engagement in the contest of ideas is to craft and prosecute the contemporary Liberal Party's vision of the national interest in 2025 and beyond. Now, just as Menzies, in establishing our party, spoke of the forgotten people, the salary earners, the shopkeepers, the skilled artisans, the professional men and women, the farmers, and those not rich enough to have individual power, and all taken for granted by each political party. And just as the genius of John Howard was to identify the forgotten people of his time, those history lessons have given us the Howard battlers, the people who were dismissed, disregarded by Paul Keating, the small business owners, the tradies, the parents, the retirees. And another great memory from my years serving in John Howard's government was the family at the heart of our society, everything we believe in and everything we strive for. So I think about, well, not that I want to have a term that naturally maps on from this, but a word does keep coming into my mind about the people we need to be here for today. And yes, they're hardworking Australians, but they're the disenfranchised people. Disenfranchised because Generation Z and the millennials are in an altogether different category. And one of the things that we have to understand as the modern Liberal Party is just how different that is. And I said when I became leader that I would meet modern Australia where they were, and I have. And so have all my colleagues. Of course we have. We've been listening, we've been learning, we've been understanding. And we know that Gen Z and millennial are right now the disenfranchised people, because they are facing a future of unaffordable housing, of stagnant wages, of spiralling cost of living. And we know that they and their children are set to inherit a worse standard of living than we have. For the first time, a standard of living that is declining, for the first time since the Second World War. And I just don't think it's good enough that we, in positions of leadership and arguably power, think that's okay, because it's not okay. And when I look at my children in their 30s and my grandchildren, 6 of them aged under 6 and under, of course, it does concentrate your mind, and you do think about what you want for the future for your family. And that is the pressing call to action for all of us. What are we going to do for this disenfranchised generation of Australians? And wherever I go, and I meet with young people, and I say, what matters to you? And obviously, why didn't you vote for us at the last election? Did you even think of us? Maybe not. Do you know what we stand for? Maybe not. Did you have any idea? Maybe not. And, you know, we ask those honest questions because we need to, because we have to develop a sound, sensible, contemporary set of policies to meet modern Australia where they are at the next election. But no young person ever lets me out of that conversation without talking about housing, because it is just so important and it is just so unfair that we found our pathway into a home of our own, but there's a generation that has absolutely given up on that. So we are so determined to take action on that. Now, Brian, you were generous enough to compliment me on my 2 speeches so far, and I just want to remind everyone here and put them in the context of this Howard lecture, because after we lost in 2022, John Howard came and addressed our party room and said, if you're the Liberal Party and you're not working on tax reform or industrial relations reform, then you need to question, what are you doing? And I haven't forgotten that, and I've taken that on board. And with respect to tax reform, it is absolutely in the DNA of the Liberal Party that you should keep more of what you earn. And then when you work really hard, if you're someone who takes risks, this is something the Labor Party doesn't understand, works hard, steps out, gives back, you deserve to be rewarded for your effort and not to feel that you have anything to apologise for. And I think of my dad, who was the son of an English school teacher who had absolutely nothing growing up, who went and worked in the intelligence services and did his stint in the war and migrated to Australia looking for a better life, basically starting again, almost in his early 50s. But all through his life he saved. And when I was growing up, I used to assume we didn't have very much money because there never was money for this, this or this. But it was all being saved. It was all being invested, and it was all being carefully put away. And that's a nice story, and I know everybody can't, achieve what my dad was able to achieve for the circumstances of their life. But when people do work hard, they should be rewarded. And I remember when you all know that I fly aeroplanes. Perhaps I remind people of that quite a lot. But I decided I wanted to fly aeroplanes, which was very disappointing, I have to say, to my father, who said, well, this is no good. There's no money in this. It's not a good career for a woman, and you need to get a good job in the public service. Well, I did get a good job in the public service, but even way back then, but I was working hard to save for my flying lessons, and then I got a second job working in a takeaway food caravan in Canberra called Jilly's Roadside Diner, making horrible hamburgers. And then I would finish there at 10 o'clock at night, and I would go and I would vacuum my department store, and I would save for my flying lessons. And I had to do a lot of this because I wasn't very good when I was starting my flying lessons. But I also noted very carefully how there's a lot of money going in tax by the time you get to your second and your third job. What am I doing? And I sort of thought, this is not right. I'm having a crack. I'm doing something that's important to the future because I'm going to have a job in this field, which I did, etc., etc. And then later on, when my flying career landed me in Western Queensland and I worked in the shearing sheds, the hardest job I've ever done, because a long, hard, hot day is something we should never forget, and the dignity of that work is something we should always reward. And I met my then husband, who was a shearer, but he was shearing so he could have a start on the family farm. So we lived in a caravan and we saved all our money. And I would send it home and my dad would put it in the cash management account. He started to forgive my strange choices because he could see that I was saving money. He was always very, very happy to see those checks come in, go into the cash management account, interest, etc. And that gave us the start on the family farm. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had that. And so we were able to get a start, support the next generation or the generation of his parents, which you always had to do. People familiar with farming families know all about this. And now, I mean, there were tough times, let's face it, I've talked about those tough times, but the point I make is that building something for the future for yourself and your family is just a worthwhile thing, and governments should back it in every single day of the week and support it. And now, 4 of my 6 grandchildren are the 6th generation on the family farm, and it makes me very proud indeed. So for me, when I think that when John Howard left office, personal income tax was about 22%, the average of what a person is paying. It's now heading above 24%. In another 5 or so years, it's going to get close to 28%. So it's just creeping up. You know that. And it's time we put a line in the sand, a marker in the ground, and we said, this is who we are, this is what we believe in, and we are going to reduce personal income taxes. So I have committed that we will take a package to the next election which will contain substantial personal income tax cuts. And some people say, oh, well, that's pretty difficult. Yes, it is. I've also talked about budget repair, which I'll come to. But when you see Labor making an announcement, being very, very generous with borrowed money, remember that, very generous with borrowed money, know that in assessing that proposal between now and the next election, we will dedicate that, where we can, to budget repair and personal income tax cuts. Now, budget repair is vital, and there was no better example than John Howard's government about living within your means. And we've got a government that simply doesn't live within its means. And when you're talking to your friends and family, you only have to remember one statistic, that every minute, $50,000 goes up in interest on the debt, onto the national credit card. Every minute, $50,000 in interest on Australia's debt on the national credit card. So every time Anthony Albanese sounds really generous, oh, will we continue these energy subsidies? Every time we ask him in Parliament, you know, what are you going to do to bring electricity prices down? He says, oh, well, you didn't support our subsidies. As if that was the answer. Not having an affordable system in the first place, but, just finding money from somewhere else or borrowing it from overseas and delivering it to people in subsidies. So it's critical that we start to address that. And I've talked about, quite frankly, about a culture of dependency, and it gets the Labor Party very excited because they say, yes, you see, the Liberals, the evil Liberals, always there for the top end of town, always there to sort of make cuts. Well, 2 points. The personal income tax cuts will be for low and middle income earners, not for the top end of town, because they're hurting the most. And obviously our tax relief needs to extend further and wider. But we have to address a few simple truths, one of which is that more than 50% of Australian voters receive more than 50% of their income from the government, either by way of a government payment or a government subsidy or a welfare payment. Now, I have nothing against the public service. I've been a public servant. And we back in the public service. But we also know that the public service can't be the engine of growth in this country. But right now, that is what is happening. 8 out of 10 new jobs are created in the non-market sector. So the private sector is being pushed out, crowded out, punished. I mean, we know how you feel punished if you run a small business right now. And I have spoken to so many small business owners who are just weighed down, crushed by cost, exhausted by regulation and red tape, wondering where on earth it is all going to end, and deeply unhappy. And that matters. That matters. It's interesting because Prime Minister Howard said leading into 1996, and he was lampooned for this, and it was ridiculous. He wanted people to be relaxed and comfortable. Well, right now, people are incredibly stressed, incredibly upset. And, you know, the elites at the time laughed at this, let them. But I don't know how many small businesses they've met, and I don't know how many people they know who are struggling as hard as some of these. We just can't accept a situation where the government is there to provide all the answers. Government should set the rules, not run the race. And the giant missing piece from the economic policies of this government is productivity. Again, something we understand, businesses understand, households understand, and economies that are progressing in the world understand as well. But right now, productivity is flatlining. And that's because this government doesn't know what to do about it, because the levers that they are pulling are all anti a productivity generational challenge. That's where they need to land, and that's not where they are. And when you think about productivity, you think, well, I think about the importance of the private sector, because public demand in Australia is growing at 55%, private demand is just growing at 16%. Yet another indicator that the private sector is being squeezed out, not rewarded, but punished. And that brings me to another of the lessons we learned from the Howard era about what Liberal parties should be engaged in, industrial relations. Because the modern Labor Party has run 100 miles from the Hawke-Keating-Kelty 1993 to 1996 reforms, where there was clear understanding that you should move from arbitration to enterprise-based bargaining. And the secret ingredient there is that if you have a rising if productivity is going up, so do real wages. That's the way to get increases in real wages, to have productivity increases. So right now, we've got these sort of artificial increases in nominal wages aren't flowing through to real wages. Inflation is high and sticky. Costs are going backwards. And meantime, you've got a government with emergency fiscal settings in a peacetime economy. Because ultimately, the test for all this, when you talk to Bob and Nancy Stringbag, is do you feel that you're getting ahead? You know, the government's spending all this money, $1.2 trillion by 28-29 budget. That's the forecast, and big numbers don't really mean anything to people. But do you think you feel any better? Well, no, you don't. And unfortunately, people don't feel any better. So we've got this massive spending that's not translating into anything for Australians. And where we need to focus is on fairness for the disenfranchised generation, Gen Z and millennial. Because the reason why we need to manage the budget responsibly, and we need to reduce income tax, and we need to make changes to workplace relations law that address multi-employer bargaining craziness, the definitions of casual workers. By the way, there's about 37 and counting. How do you even deal with that as a small business? Unfair dismissal claims in the Fair Work Commission are at record highs, which demonstrates there's something really badly wrong with the system. Probably that employers are getting the real rough end of the deal, same job, same pay, and so on. So these are things we are going to turn our attention to. And right now, we've got indicators that the CFMEU and other unions are behaving just as you would expect. So none of this ever goes away. It's a constant challenge, and we are up for it. But the reason is because we're not going to give up on Generation Z and millennials, and it's right that we fight for a future for them. So when I talk to people in big numbers and statistics and productivity, and I don't blame them for eyes glazed over sometimes, but when you say, do you really think it's fair that the next generation has a lower standard of living than you do? They don't agree. Now, the big announcement we made today was about energy, and I want to spend a bit of time on that because the Liberal Party principles were the ones we applied to the announcement that we made today. And if I look briefly at John Howard's approach to energy and emissions policy, it was technology neutral and it was anchored in affordability. Because he understood the importance of Australia's economic interests and that energy policy must strengthen, not weaken, the foundations of the Australian economy. And all of the policy initiatives implemented in this area by the Howard government demonstrated a clear-eyed commitment to the national interest and that Australia should play its part to reduce emissions, but not at the expense of our competitiveness as a nation or our hard-fought living standards. So John Howard's approach was to take account of national economic circumstances, natural resource endowments, and allowing a range of market-based policy measures. And he also advanced the view that new technologies were crucial, breakthrough technologies, I talked about those today, to achieving lasting reductions in emissions. So I've been the Shadow Minister for Manufacturing and Industry for the last 3 years, and a lot of my experiences on the ground have informed the decision that I led today. Because I have travelled around many, many factories, many, many heavy industries, and I've met many people who are involved in the thing that we in Australia should be incredibly proud of, our sovereign manufacturing capability. And they've told me they can't do it with Labor's energy price, with Labor's lack of reliability, with Labor's workplace laws, and with the uncertainty of the investment landscape because of all those things. But if we talk about productivity, we know that energy is just a key factor in productivity in this country. And when energy is unaffordable, everything is unaffordable because energy is the economy. And it really is the economy in this country. Now, a week ago, I was standing at Tomago Aluminium and I stood in the very same spot the Prime Minister had stood in January this year. He stood there and he said, "This is fantastic. This is what a future made in Australia looks like. And this factory will be making aluminium and employing these amazing workers for 40 more years." Well, I agree with him on one thing. The workers are amazing because they have some of the highest and best aluminium production in the world. Because you measure the efficiency of an aluminium production process by something called current efficiency, which basically says if the current efficiency was 100, it would mean for every amp of electricity would be converted into aluminium. Well, in Tomago Aluminium, it's 95.5. It's almost the highest in the world. And when I took the brief walk around that I did, I saw the pride in the eyes of the people who worked because they know, like many Australian people in manufacturing, that they're doing what they do better than anyone else in the world. The Tomago aluminium smelter was turned on in 1983. It has run 24 hours, 7 days a week since 1983. Can you imagine what Australia will feel, or should feel, if in 2028 the switch is turned off? Because we don't make aluminium anymore. Oh, but that's okay. Someone will tell you that, we can import it. We can get it along with everything else in our renewable energy economy from China or Europe if it's a high-tech thing. But this wasn't just a warning about aluminium or a warning about Tomago. It was a warning about Australia's energy policy, a massive warning that we needed to heed and everyone needs to heed. Because if the biggest energy user in Australia, who arguably could accumulate the best possible contracts for price of electricity, is telling us that in 2028 it is not commercially viable to have aluminium smelted in this country, there's a big something wrong there. So that's aluminium. Aluminium's pretty important. In fact, there's a lot of aluminium in the renewable energy economy. But don't worry, if Tomago closes, I'm sure we'll be able to import it from China, along with wind turbines, along with solar panels, along with solar inverters and all of the systems that try very, very hard to stabilise and add inertia to a renewable energy grid. That in itself is a huge challenge and one completely misunderstood, I have to say, by the Prime Minister. Because energy is not power. Energy is, of course, the wind and the sun, but what you have to do to convert it to power, to deliver what it needs to for Australians, if it's renewable, is actually very expensive. And it doesn't always work as well as you think. And you only have to ask the people on the Iberian Peninsula in Spain and Portugal, who completely went dark when, in fact, the renewable energy grid a few months ago turned itself off. Now, before that happened, they'd been saying, you can run everything on renewables. A bit like the Prime Minister, you can run everything on renewables. And, that was supposed to be where the whole world was looking to how you could run a whole grid on renewables. So there was a slight change in the oscillation of the frequency of the grid by, I think, 0.2 hertz. That became 0.6. So the grid did what it tries to do when something like this happens, is to stabilise. But because renewable grids don't have the inertia that a spinning turbine does, which gives breathing space when there's a fluctuation, the next thing that happened was a whole lot of solar panels switched themselves off, which sent the wrong demand signal into the grid, which caused more things to switch themselves off. Now, there'll be energy experts in this room who can give a much better explanation than me, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. Pretty soon, there was a cascading series of failures of generators. At some point, the operator tried to add some more traditional power, but it was too late because by then, everything had turned itself off. And 11 people died in that. Some people died because their ventilators turned off and they suffocated. Some people died because they breathed in carbon monoxide. because they had the wrong sort of heater, and so on. But I worry that this government doesn't understand renewable energy at all, and I worry about what it means for us and our future. So with that in mind, not just with that in mind, with critical affordability questions in mind, affordability and reliable questions in mind, we made a key announcement today, which is that the Liberal Party will remove a net zero target from our policy, and if elected, will remove Labor's 43% 2030 target and its net zero by 2050 target from the Climate Change Act. We remain committed to the Paris Agreement and committed to doing our fair share to reduce emissions in the following way. We will reduce emissions on average year on year, as we did when last in government, in line with comparable countries, and as far and as fast as technologies allow, without imposing mandated costs. And this is going to be a policy that actually recognises Labor's failures, because having told us they've given Australians a pathway to lower emissions and lower power prices, but in fact they've done neither, because emissions are flatlining, if anything, or going up, and power prices have gone up 40% since Labor came into power. So we can look everyone in the eye and absolutely make it clear that our policy is about the things that matter, but giving priority to affordability. Always, energy affordability has to be the main game. If you are a government responsible for your citizens, you have to provide affordable energy. And you also have to have sovereign manufacturing capability in this country, something that, sadly, I don't think this government cares about, with a safeguard mechanism that basically puts a carbon tax on anyone who conducts an emissions-intensive industry. So in conclusion, the Liberal Party has always drawn strength from our universal principles: belief in the individual, the dignity of work, the strength of families and communities, the importance of free enterprise, and a government that enables rather than controls. These are the foundations of our future prosperity. And when the Liberals have triumphed, it's been because we spoke plainly and we acted boldly, not by borrowing the language or instincts of our opponents, but by drawing confidently on our principles. We will have a compelling, principled, practical vision. We're developing such right now to meet the aspirations of Australians. And top of that list today is affordable energy. The forgotten people are waiting, the Howard battlers are waiting, the disenfranchised Australians are waiting. They want a government that respects their choices, rewards their effort and secures their future. So I'm determined that we meet this moment with a bold vision for growth, because growth pays for better services. Growth lifts income. Growth gives hope. So we're all inspired by the words of John Howard, that the things that unite Australians are infinitely greater than the things that divide us. And I am convinced that the principles and the policy initiatives that we have announced today can unite Australians behind a policy that's focused on one of the key components of everything that matters: affordable energy and a responsible approach to emissions reduction at the same time. Thank you.
Well done, Susan. Great.
Take a seat, Mr. Howard. And
thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for delivering such a strong speech, strong, enlightening speech filled with policy. You've had the biggest week of your political career, I dare say, so that makes this speech all the more impressive. I was going to moderate this discussion, but I think Mr. Howard is best in all of his unmoderated brilliance, so I I won't get involved. He was in your job 30 years ago to the day, so he knows the challenges better than anyone. I will just warn you, Susan, the last time Mr Howard had a discussion like this following the Howard lecture, there were a few very complex, detailed questions about the Australian cricket team directed to Boris Johnson. So don't be surprised.
He didn't know anything about it.
On that note, Mr Howard, over to you.
Well, David, thank you. Just to elucidate, when Boris gave the equivalent lecture a couple of years ago, I was asked to interview him afterwards. And I said to him, "Do you think Johnny Bairstow was out?" I tell you what, he didn't have the faintest idea. But he worked out that it probably had something to do with cricket, because I'd asked him the question and he bumbled his way through it very well in his great style. But Susan, you're far more important than Boris, although let me say I like Boris. He was a funny act. Can I congratulate you on your speech? Can I take you? I mean, I've got to move a form of vote of thanks in a moment, but I think what the party has done over the last few days is a very courageous and decisive thing. You've had an open internal debate about an important policy. And the fact that it's been in the news, so what? That will be forgotten. What won't be forgotten is the commitment the Liberal Party has made to affordable energy and all the other things. It's essential, particularly, but not only in the early months of opposition, to confront the difficult policy issues, debate them in a public fashion, and reach a definitive conclusion. And you've done that. And as for whether it's before or after the National Party has reached it, so what? I mean, I am a great coalitionist. I think the great years of our side of politics being in power has been Menzies and Fadden and McEwen and Fraser and Anthony and myself, supported by the wonderful late Tim Fisher and John Anderson. I've not met a more honourable person in public life than John Anderson and Mark Vale. We have our differences. There are fewer differences now than there were then. There were far fewer differences. But I think you are to be congratulated, and you articulated extremely well. So that really provokes me to ask the first of my questions, enough of my speeches. First question, what is the next big policy issue you're going to thrash out? I'm not a journalist.
Two come to mind. One is migration, because we've been hearing a lot from every corner of the country, and every question, every presentation, every idea is different, but the common theme is migration. And that's incredibly important, and you understood that in your term of government better, I think, than almost any Prime Minister since. So I have said it needs to be lower. I've also said the problems we're facing are not the fault of any migrant or migrant community. They are failings of infrastructure. And those failings should be sheeted home to governments who have not planned, who have not implemented, and who have wasted public funds. Instead of building schools, roads, hospitals, public transport that works, cycleways that make sense instead of ones that don't. There's quite a few of those in this city. They haven't done that. And I think this is a conversation Australians are up for, and we will do it in a respectful way, and we will develop a policy that recognises it's not just about one overall number, it's about a variety of strands, whether it be the humanitarian intake, skilled visas, working holiday makers, and how that is mapped, if you like, to the needs and the aspirations of different parts of the country.
Susan, when the great Robert Gordon Menzies retired as Prime Minister, in his farewell press conference, he was asked what were his two great achievements. And he talked about the coalition in the sort of terms that I have, because not surprisingly, I'd sort of watched what he did and said, and it all made a lot of sense to me. And he also said that what he had done in education, and of course Menzies was the person who brought in state aid for Catholic and other independent schools and broke through 100 years of discrimination against the Catholic community. And of course he did wonderful things in tertiary education. Now that's a long time ago. It's 60 odd years ago. You have talked rightly about the importance of education. Do you have some ideas, some thoughts, some proposals in that area?
Education has been incredibly important for me. As a mum with a baby in a capsule, I turned up to study economics at La Trobe University in Wodonga, and that changed my life. I needed to get a university education to earn some money to support the farm. But walking into the classroom, and you'll be interested that the lecturer was Tim Fisher's wife, Judy.
Nice, lovely lady.
And my best subject was the world economy between the wars, which is a piece of trivia. But Judy and I still keep in touch today, and Tim Fisher, until we lost him, was a dear friend. Education now is dominated by concerns about artificial intelligence and what it means for our system, what it means for our kids, and what it means for the future of business and industries. So I'm very fortunate to have Julian Lisa. He's the Shadow Education spokesperson, and I have asked him to consider how we might best respond to those challenges. Separately from that, there is always the issue of the curriculum, because every time you look at the curriculum, you find it is filled with problems, questions, issues, or, as I often say, what on earth is going on in this curriculum? While we don't control the curriculum, it's a product of the state education ministers coming around the table with the federal minister. The next discussions around what the next curriculum should look like will begin quite soon. So we will lean into those discussions, we will consult with parents, and we will listen to their concerns as expressed to us about the content of the curriculum, because it's important. I always talk about the basics, and teachers talk about things differently, and I want to say our teachers are amazing. They have to be parents, they have to fill out paperwork, they have to do so much. But I know that what we need is an understanding of the basics and also critical thinking ability, which if we're not careful, we will lose in our kids. Critical thinking ability. So that no one tells you what to think, but just gives you the tools to make your own decisions. And I think that message should flow through from primary to secondary to tertiary education. And yeah.
If we could just go overseas for a moment. One of the privileges I had, both as an opposition leader, but most particularly as a Prime Minister, was to meet world figures that I admired. I mean, I had the great privilege of meeting Margaret Thatcher while I was opposition leader, and she gave me a lecture on how to become a Prime Minister and help. Did it very well, I haven't forgotten it. Who are the sort of world leaders on the stage now who you admire and think have very relevant things to say in relation to the world's contemporary challenges?
I wouldn't immediately point to any world leader. No. For this simple reason, that maybe the circumstances that a certain leader might find themselves in are so different from the Australian situation that you can't necessarily correspond what is happening there to what is happening here. But I always admire leaders who take a stand and a principled position and don't try to be all things to all people. And you don't see that consistently in world leaders, but you see it in some of the decisions that they make at the time that they make them. And I'm often asked this question with respect to, who do I draw inspiration from? And I'll be honest, it isn't from world leaders, past or present. It's from ordinary Australians who I meet every day, who come to me and other members of Parliament, because we're often the place of last resort when you walk in the door, and they have completely lost hope. And in appreciating that we might be able to help them, we see what their life has been like or is like, and I often reflect that they've got more courage than I will ever have just to get out of bed in the morning. And that inspires me because it makes me want to work very, very hard for them. And while people might have observed that we've been talking about ourselves, I know, as you always said, that you mustn't talk about yourself, because all people hear is you talking about yourselves. We have to demonstrate what I know we feel and what I know motivated us all to come into politics, which is to work bloody hard for the Australian people, because right now they are counting on us. And I take that responsibility very seriously, and I'm incredibly proud of every single one of my team who similarly wants to fight for ordinary Australians.
The last question I think I might ask you relates to the history of our country and the history of our party. I've just got a copy and started to read Tony Abbott's book. Tony is a wonderful wordsmith. It's so easy to read what he writes, and I find myself nodding in agreement with most of it, and not all of it, but I mean, you don't get two people as philosophically close as Tony and I without there being some differences of opinion. Do you think that the history of this country is both adequately understood by its citizens or properly taught in our schools and universities?
In one word, no. Absolutely not. And wasn't that a fantastic night when Tony's book was launched? For anyone who was there, it was really quite extraordinary. I have the book and I've started reading it, and I recommend probably buy quite a few for Christmas presents, because it's, as you say, it's very readable, it's very accessible, and it's very real. You know, all of you, that the school curriculum has gone right off the rails with a lot of the history of Australia. The importance, yes, of Indigenous Australians and their contribution to our land, our society and our future and our identity, but not recognising the three great strands are Indigenous culture, European settlement and multicultural Australia, the migrant nation. And I want that to be better explained to students. I want them to learn about that as well as civics. And I want us to be able to stand up for the Australia that is demonstrated positively every day by those three great strands of humanity in this country.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Mr. Howard. We're truly blessed to have Mr. Howard continuing to contribute to our events at the Menzies Research Centre, but more importantly, our nation is blessed to have Mr. Howard continuing to contribute to and enrich national debates that we're having. So we thank you for that, Mr. Howard. The reason that you set up the Menzies Research Centre, or worked to establish the Menzies Research Centre some 30 years ago, is so that we could contribute to policy work, detailed policy work in opposition, where we find ourselves now. We're really encouraged to hear from Susan all of the meaty policy issues that you have the courage to embark upon. So we stand ready at the Menzies Research Centre to help you with those key debates around tax reform. We'll work with your Shadow Treasurer, who's here tonight, Ted O'Brien, on a plan to lower taxes. We'll be working on industrial relations reform with you as well. And one way that you can help us contribute to that policy work is by supporting our work at the Menzies Research Centre. Sussan, I want to leave you with a copy of The Forgotten People, a book that we produced, I think, under Nick's role as Executive Director some years ago. It was written 75 years ago, but so much of it is still relevant today. It's a guidebook for understanding Australian liberalism and how it should be applied in a political context, but it's also a guidebook to understanding the hopes, needs and desires of the Australian people. So this will serve you well in the very important job that you have. So thank you, Sussan, and to Mr Howard. Please join me in thanking them.
Can I just congratulate the Menzies Research Centre on you and your chairman, Brian, for the tremendous work you do in maintaining, should I say the rage? No, the faith. I did spend a whole day in Canberra on Tuesday and was almost submerged by the love fest. I mean, whatever, and I admired Gough Whitlam's talents as a parliamentarian, but gee, he didn't run a very successful government. And I know that the person we've heard from tonight, when she gets the opportunity, which will be at the next election, she will run a very successful government. And many of the people who've come with her tonight will be ministers in that government. The Deputy Leader of the Federal Parliamentary Liberal Party, Senator Jess Collins, and anyway, I'll get myself into trouble. My wife always says to me, you should never do those sort of things without a script in front of you because you will leave somebody out. And I've no doubt left out 3 people and they'll run around saying, that means Howard will say, I'm not worthy of being a minister. No, I don't want to do that, but I do want to say something very special about some former members who've come tonight, and very particularly my dear friend Michael Bowen. Michael just keeps adding years to his age, and it makes it very difficult for me to catch up, but he's a wonderful friend and a great supporter of the Liberal Party, and anybody who's got the energy that he's got, well over the age of 90, to travel to events from Canberra is to be admired and thanked. So to all of you, thank you. And to you, Sussan, one thing that really warmed me, many things about your speech tonight, was the tribute you paid to small business. I came from a small business family. My father, as many of you know, had a petrol service station, or garage as he called it, near Dulwich Hill Station in Sydney. He worked in it for years and years and years. And he has no love of the local Labor-dominated Marrickville Council, I can tell you that. They actually at one stage said that he should take his petrol pumps and put them inside, off the curb. I mean, how can you run a petrol service station without having petrol pumps on the curb? That was never adequately explained, but anyway, I digress. I just want to say that small business is the heart and soul. It meant everything to my family. It meant enormous things to my dear mother, and it meant enormous things to my 3 older brothers and myself. And Dad worked his insides out, having fought for his country in the terrible trenches of World War I. He then worked his insides out through the years of the Depression, making enough money to support a family. And that's a pretty meritorious thing, and something that I admired and have never forgotten. And I could tell from the way in which she dwelt on the subject, Sussan understands so well, and it will connect her with millions of Australians who believe in the individual initiative involved in running your own business. Sussan, you have our support, our affection. I congratulate you on resolving that very difficult policy. The fact that you had a bit of an argument about it doesn't matter. We all have arguments about things that matter. It's easy to resolve a policy where there's no difference of opinion. There aren't too many of those, I can tell you, but congratulations and good luck with the next one. If you follow the example of debating differences, acknowledging them, but coming together in a consensus, you will not only do well, you'll do spectacularly well. Thank you.